turn to the top of page 11. We're starting the last unit for your third lecture test, joints. And this is all information that was given out in lab, but we'll review here briefly just to reemphasize the material and to ensure that actually you do have a good hit on it, since this test does have the potential to be one of your easier exams. Let's make sure you really have it. Anyway, some general comments on joints. One of their purposes is basically what? To hold the skeleton together, because a joint is found wherever two or more bones meet. Not in all cases, but in a good number of cases they do provide mobility. And if you guys remember, which type of joint is that? That provides freely lots of mobility? Your diarthrosis. And which type of joint is your diarthrosis? That's your who? Synovial joint. Anyway, joints are also the weakest part of the skeleton. It's more easy to disarticulate two bones where they meet than to break a bone, unless maybe you have osteoporosis. But generally, they're considered the weakest part of the skeleton. Now, what we're going to do is classify them according to two main criteria. One, functionality, how well do they move or not, and then structural classification, what are they made out of? Is what's connected to them collagen? Is there joint cavity? Is there cartilage involved? And then we'll talk about some other topics in future videos. So first thing, according to functional classification, we have a synarthrosis. We're going to think of this with synarthro, amphiarthrosis, diarthrosis. Arthrosis is going to be our way of thinking of joint. A synarthrosis does not have any movement. Easy enough. Amphiarthrosis has a little bit of movement. We think of that with the axial skeleton, such as the pelvis, being able to flex a little during childbirth. And diarthrosis are your freely movable joints, usually your appendicular skeleton. Now what we're going to try to do is cross-reference this functional classification with the structural classification that we'll see. With structural classification, we're going to ask, is there a joint cavity or not? And if not, what connects it together? Is it cartilage? Is it fibrous connective tissue? Well, with this first one, with what holds it together is fibrous connective tissues without a joint cavity, we're dealing with one of three things: a suture, a syndesmosis, or a gymphosis. Oh yeah, by the way, this is the day of the deadly S's, and you'll see what I mean by that. So this is where you just kind of practice vocabulary and make sure you have it down packed. So with these fibrous joints, you do not have a joint cavity, and you're being held together by collagen fibers. A suture is our first example. Now sutures are actually collagen, especially in the newborn till you reach your final size. But once you finish puberty, they become ossified. Remember fontanelles? We talked about them. Well, this could easily, there are definitely some parts of this where they are enlarged, but overall you have collagen holding it together. And you do want collagen. You don't want some elastic tissue where your skull kind of bounces like a spring. And obviously this is a synarthrosis, unless you're kind of cheating Al Capone, you get hit by a baseball bat, then I'm sure there'll be some movement in the one of the cranial bones there. So these are the shortest type of fibers. In contrast, we have what we call a syndesmosis, and this is where you have cords of collagen, such as where one bone connects to another. We call it a ligament. So this is an old word, but we're just seeing it used in a different way. So a ligament is what type of joint? It's a syndesmosis. Sometimes you have sheets of collagen. We call it an interosseous membrane because it's in between the bones. You see that like with the radius and the ulnar. And how much movement depends upon the particular joints. I'm not going to try to necessarily hit any hard, fast rules on that. And for dental hygienists, there's this thing called a gymphosis. And I guess maybe Forrest Gump, I don't know if he got the name from that. But nonetheless, this is found only with teeth. It's a peg in the socket. So what's the peg? The tooth. What's a socket? Well, it's going to be the bone, which is either the maxilla or the mandible. And that's where the tooth is going to actually go into. And what holds it in place is the periodontal ligament. Peri means what? Around. Don means what? Tooth. So that's what holds it in place. So these three are all fibrous joints. Now, obviously, this one is a what in terms of functionality? It should be a synarthrosis. If you make it an amphiarthrosis or diarthrosis, you know what that tells you? You ain't brushing your teeth. Go brush your teeth, see a dental hygienist. They should not move. Okay, enough on fibrous joints. Next one is a synchondrosis. So chondro tells us what cartilage, syn without movement. So this is a cartilaginous joint. It's where the bones are connected together without a joint cavity. Joint cavity will be on the next page. And the synchondrosis is where we have hyaline cartilage. Remember our friend hyaline cartilage? Connected the two bones together. A good example of this is your epiphyseal plate. Your epiphyseal plate. Because isn't this bone, cartilage, bone? Now you think of it as a single bone, but literally the bone-like material is separated by cartilage. So it is a joint. And eventually it does get ossified, giving you the what? We call it now who? Epiphyseal line. The first rib and the manubrium of the sternum is considered a synchondrosis. And these are both synarthrosis. They really do not move. What's another cartilaginous joint? You have these things called a symphysis. And with a symphysis, you do have fibrocartilage located in it. So there's a good amount of fibrocartilage in here. There's still a little bit of hyaline cartilage on the ends of the bones, but the meat and potatoes of the disc, if you want to call it as such, is fibrocartilage and acts as a shock absorber. A lot of pressure goes there. It does gain a little flexibility when you're given childbirth, so we do consider it an amphiarthrosis. Also, your intervertebral joints, what's literally with the discs that are located here, you have a vertebral bone, and then you have a disc, and another vertebral bone, and then another disc. These discs have a lot of fibrocartilage, take a lot of pressure on them, a lot of compression. Basically a shock absorber. It's a good way of thinking about it. On the top of page 12, we're talking about synovial joints, and these are the only ones with a joint cavity. You can see the cavity in here that I'm kind of playing with. And it's a diarthrosis. It's freely movable. Let's look at its anatomy, then we can think about its physiology a little bit. Now, we have this thing called the articular capsule. And it basically kind of surrounds the joint cavity per se. The articular capsule on the more superficial area has a fibrous capsule, which is just dense, irregular connective tissue, which you know is strong, lots of collagen. So otherwise this thing would be very flimsy. So you have the fibrous capsule, and then just deep to that, lining the synovial cavity, if you look at this in green, is the synovial membrane. Now notice the green here versus the blue on the surface of the bone. So we have the synovial membrane, that is, it's not present on the end of the bone, because always that is what's on the ends of long bones? Articular cartilage. Ooh, what's this, by the way? Ooh, that's your who? Epiphyseal line. But you can see it right there. You see, you learned something. Ooh, medullary cavity. What lines this? What's the inner lining here? Isn't that endosteum? And we already have periosteum over here. The articular cartilage here's function is to help cushion the bone. The synovial membrane makes, well, synovial fluid. And only synovial joints have a joint cavity. And you kind of look at it here. There's not that much room in there. There's not that much room. You can see the joint cavity, a little bit of articular cartilage, spongy bone. Looks like epiphyseal line somewhere's around there. Somewhere's in here. So, what does synovial fluid do? It's used for lubrication. Just like serous fluids is for lubrication in cavities that are close to the outside, we have the synovial fluid for these cavities associated with joints. And how does it work? As the weeping mechanism. What happens is when the joint flexes and the two bones want to come closer to each other, it puts pressure on the cartilage, and excess fluid, which is normally in it, Think of the cartilage as acting as a sponge, and we squeeze a sponge, does more fluid come out. So when the two bones want to come closer to each other, more fluid comes out, trying to minimize the chances of the two bones actually rubbing against each other. I mean, if the two cartilages do rub, that's fine, but over time it can break down. What we call that, probably when you're losing cartilage big time, we call that what? Arthritis. And we'll see that in the last set of notes for this unit. And then when the bones are relaxed, the fluid seeps back into the cartilage. As we say, it's decompressed. Okay? Easy enough.